Silent meltdowns. Do you ever experience a silent meltdown, shutdown, or implosion? Maybe you know someone who sometimes withdraws, disconnects, and dissociates. In this video, we're looking at silent internal autistic meltdowns and how they can actually be worse than explosive external autistic meltdowns. I'll go through what it feels like to have a shutdown or implosion, how to understand what's going on for the person, and finally how to actually respond in a helpful way. Hi everyone, Paul Micallef here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. So when we hear the word meltdown, it's often associated with this kind of explosive volcano-like meltdown. And that kind of makes sense. That's the easiest type of meltdown to see on the outside. But actually, there are lots of different ways that a person might experience a meltdown, and having an external explosive meltdown is really only one of those ways. And I would actually argue that while the external explosive meltdown has the potential to hurt others around me, it also has the potential to be an obvious flag to others around me that something is seriously wrong and I need help. Whereas a silent meltdown is exactly that. It's not visible on the outside. And so that extra red flag to communicate to the people around me that I'm seriously struggling and seriously need help right now, it means that I'm imploding on the inside, the damage is being done on the inside, and the people around me don't realize how serious the situation is. So while a silent meltdown or a shutdown may not look violent on the outside, it may often feel incredibly violent on the inside. For me, it's often like this contained firestorm in a bottle that just keeps increasing the pressure and increasing the pressure. And ironically, the more the pressure builds up, the less safe it is to vent any of that pressure. So weirdly, if something's happening that is not too extreme, it's actually easier to communicate that to other people and easier to ask for help. But crossing a certain threshold, it is just absolutely unsafe for me to share what I'm feeling on the inside, because the explosion, it feels like, at least at the time, my brain is panicking that if I let people see what's going on, it's going to make everything 100 times worse. So what this leads to, just like in the more stereotypical meltdowns, it leads to a complete inability to communicate my needs. It leads to a complete disconnection from the outside world. And the internal experience is of just this raging, uncontrolled thing that I just have to ride out until I eventually calm down and regain some control. And at first glance, you might think, oh, well, isn't it better to stay in control? Aren't you a little bit more in control because you're holding it in as opposed to letting it explode? And the answer is no, not at all. I'm not more in control. I just have a different coping strategy. I'm not choosing to hold it in because I have capacity to hold it in, and if it was greater, then I would let it out in an explosion. I'm completely unable to make those conscious choices, and my survival circuitry has decided for me that shutting down is how we're going to protect ourselves in the moment. Now, I've heard some in the community tell me that having a meltdown is actually a pleasant experience for them. It's kind of like this emotional release, and it's a healthy way for them that they have found to regulate their emotions. And yeah, it's a bit extreme, but it works. And it's just the way that they do things. Whereas my experience of an internal meltdown, a silent meltdown or shutdown, has never ever been positive. And my theory for that, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion on that as well, is that with an external explosion, at least the energy is going somewhere. Whereas with the strategy of holding everything in and having an internal implosion, the energy has nowhere to go. So it's doing all of this damage on the inside. The firestorm is raging on the inside. And then what? Where does it go? It doesn't go anywhere. It can often stay there for a very long time. Whereas I can completely understand the experience of, how about I burst into tears and cry uncontrollably for 5 minutes and then feel a little bit better because it's all out now. So in contrast to an externally visible meltdown, a silent meltdown, in my experience anyway, doesn't always do very much to help the situation in the long term. Firstly, because it doesn't actually release the pressure, it's all still in there. And secondly, because it does less socially to flag that there's a problem and make it more likely to get support from other people. And for me personally, this is precisely the reason that I am likely to get to that meltdown stage in the first place, is because I've already been trying to get support from other people. I've already been trying to adjust my situation and say, hey, this thing, I'm reaching my limit really quickly. We need to do something here before I reach my limit, please. And when those messages don't go through effectively and I do end up reaching that limit, then after that point, there is no further ability to communicate. But unfortunately, in society, silence is often interpreted as consent. So what people see on the outside is, I was complaining about this thing and now I've stopped complaining. And so it's easy for them to get the completely incorrect impression that the problem is not a problem anymore, or that I've dealt with it and I don't really care about it anymore. Whereas actually, in reality, things have escalated drastically. Now my survival circuitry is on board, trying to protect myself from this situation. So as you can imagine, that is a very lonely, isolating experience, literally disconnecting. I've already tried to use my words to explain to other people what's happening for me and what I need. And when that doesn't work, then my whole brain just runs away and takes it upon itself to try and regulate and try and fix the problem. So that means that my environment doesn't get any better. I just have to deal with this raging firestorm of stress internally without changing anything on the outside. And you might ask, well, when does it become safe again to reconnect with the world? And that's a very, very, very good question, because it feels like it isn't safe again to reconnect with the world when nothing has changed. And because I've lost my ability to communicate, how do I tell people what needs to change? Especially when I had the ability to communicate, I already did that and nothing changed. So why would I think that that's going to work another time? So I originally said I was going to talk about how it feels, how to understand it, and what to do. And I seem to be mixing all of those together. So instead of separating them out as a structure, I think I'm just going to continue to mix them all together. And I'll go back if there's anything that I've missed. But the point of telling you how I feel about it and the external experience is so that people on the outside, hopefully you listening to this video, can understand the types of strategies that are going to be helpful for me and the types of strategies that are not going to be helpful. Unfortunately, the default strategy of many, many people when they see someone withdraw and disassociate is to encourage them to reconnect and re-engage, which is exactly the wrong strategy a lot of the time. The reason it's the wrong strategy is because there was a reason, there was a problem that caused the dissociation, that caused the shutdown, the silent meltdown, the implosion. And if that reason is still there, then it's literally not safe to re-engage. So you've skipped a step. The first step is to make it safe first. And then once it is safe, then we can work on trying to feel safe in a safe environment. Trying to feel safe in an unsafe environment is a recipe for disaster. That's like being in an active war zone and just, oh, everything is fine. I don't need to be on edge or stressed. No, you do need to be on edge or stressed because the environment is inherently dangerous. So what we need to do first is identify the stress of what caused the shutdown in the first place and help to reduce that stress and fix the situation so that when I've built up the resources to start thinking about re-engaging again, I'm not just going to be bashed on the head and go straight back to my little hidey hole. So in terms of what to do when you see someone shut down or withdraw or dissociate or anything like that, the number one thing to do is take the situation seriously. The implosion is not better than the explosion just because it doesn't disrupt the class. The next thing to do is to treat it like a meltdown. And this is what was supposed to be point number 2, but I've mixed them all up, so that's okay. Point number 2 was supposed to be, what is a meltdown and how can we understand a silent meltdown in the same way that we can understand an explosive meltdown? And essentially, there are a couple of characteristics of a meltdown that make it very unique. Very unique, that's okay, I'm going to run with that. The key thing is that there is no capacity for logical reasoning. It's an extreme survival, fight-flight type response. And so when we're thinking about how to help a person in survival mode, I always go back to something that Stephen Porges said in the development of polyvagal theory, which is to think about instead, how would I calm an anxious kitten? No words, no reason, no demand, no arguing, no appeal to rationality. Focus on communicating safety, especially in nonverbal ways. And the message that we need to give is something like, I know you're not in control right now. I'm not asking you to be in control right now. I'm saying that we are taking care of you right now, so everything is going to be okay. And when I hear that message, it allows me to let go of the stress that I'm trying to hold in because I'm worried that if I let it explode, then things are going to get worse. And that's the first step of letting the meltdown run its course so that I can feel better afterwards. And afterwards, when my whole nervous system has calmed down and I have some rational capacity again, then maybe it might be safe to re-engage with the world. The defense mechanism of a silent meltdown is to disconnect. I want to disconnect from my feelings, disconnect from my actions, disconnect from the outside world. And in a weird way that feels safer because it's like pushing the clutch in on a manual car, right? Does anyone drive manual transmissions anymore, right? You can rev the engine as much as you like and nothing's going to happen because it's disconnected. So finally, one last tip before we wrap up. I said before that silent meltdowns do not have outward obvious signs. And that was kind of true. But actually, if you know what you're looking for, then silent meltdowns and shutdowns are visible on the outside. It's just that the signs of a silent meltdown look like withdrawal and inaction. Now, naturally, these signs are more difficult to detect. There are any number of reasons why someone might be not saying anything right now, but checking in to see how someone's going will often give you a pretty clear sense of how well that person is holding things together and if there is an internal firestorm going on that is not super visible on the outside. Anyway, I might leave it there for today. I'd be curious to see how you found the fact that I couldn't seem to quite break everything into separate pieces and ended up mixing it all together a little bit more fluidly. Was that okay? Or should I make more of an effort to separate the ideas, which I'm sure YouTube would love in terms of, ooh, look, I've got a chapter here and a chapter here, and I don't need to be telling you all this. Always love to hear your thoughts. Hope you found this video valuable. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again next week. Bye.